Let's take you now across our borders. President Cyril Ramaphosa is due to touch down in the United States soon in an attempt to reset relations between the two countries. Let's now go to Newzroom Afrika's senior politics reporter, Ziyanda Ngobo, who's live for us in Washington, D.C. Ziyanda, good evening, our time. And let's start with whether or not the president has landed in Washington. He left South Africa as night fell on Sunday.
Well, he is still making his way. He should be landing in just about an hour or so. And we understand that DTIC Minister Park Stow has actually gone to the Air Force Base to be one of the officials to welcome President Cyril Ramaphosa here in Washington, D.C. At the same time, we understand that DIRCO Director General Zane Dango is also making his way to the White House to have a meeting there, as well as with the State Department. So we're hoping to speak to him in just an hour or so, just before the president arrives, because we've been speaking quite a lot about the strategy of the South African delegation going into this meeting. Just last night, Marco Rubio having an interview with CBS, still maintaining that there is land confiscation and genocide being waged against white Afrikaners in South Africa, so much so that they are looking to extend and expand the scope of that refugee program under the executive order that was issued by Donald Trump. So from a logistical point of view, in about an hour and a half or so, we'll be welcoming President Cyril Ramaphosa at the venue that we're standing at. This is the hotel that he'll be housed at for the next couple of days, and as well as a program. We still need to get a sense of the program. Besides the meeting on Wednesday in the Oval Office, we still need to understand who the South African delegation is going to be meeting with. How senior is it? Is our team senior enough, given the fact that Special Envoy Mcebisi Jonas will also form part of this delegation? But Xoli, I want to talk a bit more about the meat of the gathering. And let's bring in Phiwokuhle Mnyandu. He's the Assistant Director at the Center for African Studies at Howard University. Thank you for your time. You're a South African living in the US, of course, but let's talk more about the importance of this meeting. As a South African living here in the US, I'm sure you would have been watching what the Trump administration has been saying about our government, which we can agree is just simply not true. And now we know that Rubio just yesterday is still digging in his heels about this narrative. So how should our president be preparing for this moment?
I think South Africa couldn't have had a more fortunate moment having this type of president. He's a negotiator, he's cool-headed, and he's known to come up with deals basically off the cuff throughout his life. So South Africa has a very unique opportunity here. However, South Africa must not be baited into a lot of narratives. This is a time of renegotiation. And President Trump is a supreme negotiator. And in negotiating, sometimes there are bluffs, there are narratives. And in this time of narratives, in this fulcrum of all these narratives coming our way, South Africa should not flinch, and South Africa should not be caught in the nitty-gritty of certain issues and focus on the big issue and frame this as a renegotiation of relations, which have always been very good between South Africa, regardless of the times.
I mean, the relations now are at their lowest point since 1994. But do you think that the interview that Marco Rubio did for CBS News yesterday is almost a way to, I wouldn't say threaten the government, but to try and shape the narrative before those meetings even take place, almost to intimidate the South African government? And I say this against the backdrop of a U.S. government that's contending with a declining economy. Moody's downgraded the U.S. economy's credit rating just last Friday. So they too also aren't necessarily in the best position going into this meeting, perhaps even though they try and present such an image.
Mangobo, the United States is indispensable to South Africa and vice versa. If you listen to what the rhetoric was before the Canadian Prime Minister came to the White House, you would not have believed the type of amity that existed when he came here. Another one, UK Prime Minister. In fact, the Labour Party in November had sent operatives to come to the United States and campaign for the Democrats. So you would have expected that the this administration would have been quite cool on this Labour Prime Minister. Well, he came here with a big letter from the King inviting President Trump to another state visit, and he liked pomp and circumstance. And I can tell you now they have a deal. So South Africa should be ready to not be distracted and to be able to basically do the heavy lifting of statecraft. Statecraft is the magic word here. South Africa is up to the task.
Statecraft is very critical, but I also want to talk, given the fact that you have a PhD in US, China, Africa relations, and going back to how then we apply that statecraft to the extent that we can leverage the amount of attention that Trump has given South Africa, clearly out of all the African countries at the top of his mind, but also given the fact that China and the US are competing, and the US is our second largest trading partner, and we know, the relationship between the US and China. So how do we then leverage this moment for our own benefit, knowing how we also have good relations with the Chinese?
Yes, there is a nexus here, a nexus of America trying to renegotiate its place in the world and to renegotiate how other countries relate to the United States. If you look at the Vice President J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, they're almost professorial in how articulate they are about China, China's place in the world, and being able, and for the United States to remain competitive against China. South Africa is in the middle of this competitive nexus. So the extent to which South Africa can put its objective or subjective relations within this nexus is the extent to which these are going to be successful. And I think they will. There's no country in Africa that pulls its weight like South Africa. South Africa is a geographically strategic country. So no progress in US foreign policy in the world can go on without South Africa. And that in itself is the reason why I would say we're having this meeting here today after months of basically ghosting South Africa.
But why now? Many would ask, this has been going on for months. Yes, there were plans afoot to have the meeting later on, but it seems that Donald Trump caught everybody off guard, on Monday last week, where he just said, I'm expecting a South African delegation. What is it about this moment that we might not be seeing, and what does Donald Trump want from South Africa?
Well, when President Trump became president in January, he basically kicked out all the deals that America had with friend and foe, and this is good for South Africa. It means this president is an equal opportunity person when it comes to negotiation, when it comes to narratives, when it comes to basically putting countries on notice. What has happened hitherto now is that many countries have come, they've provided President Trump with deals, but as more and more it became clear that the United States was making kind of certain solid deals in Central Africa, it became clear to the adults in the room, and the current Secretary of State and the current Vice President are very intelligent people on international relations. They knew that the United States can't make much leeway in Africa without taking South Africa in its confidence. And South Africa, this is an advantage for South Africa. I think unfortunately, what we've spent the last 4 months doing in South Africa and the rest of the world is bemoaning the election of Donald Trump. And that has blindsided us from finding creative ways to engage with him. This is a sign that South Africa is finally doing so. And South Africa should also, like President Thabo Mbeki used to be very good at this, have a united message. Yeah. People should keep quiet. We shouldn't have a random Secretary General making pronouncements about foreign policy or any other minister. Thabo Mbeki was very good at this in the United States, and America took him quite seriously, Republican and Democrat.
But this approach then, is this the right way to go about it? It's very clear that we're in the era of transactional diplomacy, but the aggression and the affront presented by the Trump administration, I mean, I'm listening to you talking about how, this is a great moment for South Africa, but should it have been done in this way?
Yes, sir. Well, characters matter here. Donald Trump, you must understand the type of mandate this president has. He won all 7 swing states: Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona. These are states that he flipped. In other words, before him, President Biden had won. So the overwhelming mandate that this person has, and he is not restrained by what mostly restrains American presidents. When you're in your first term, you have one eye on this term and one eye on the next. He doesn't have those limitations. So he's able to do a lot more and get a lot more for the United States than he could before. And South Africa must be able then to imagine itself within this American renegotiation of itself.
Let's talk about this influence, because, I mean, the Make America Great Again faction was the most dominant in the Republican Party. November last year, when Trump, of course, as you've said, swung these states and re-won and returned as the 47th president of the U.S. But that seems to have since changed. Just look at the debates in Congress. Just this past weekend, Trump would have been negotiating with other Republicans to actually push through legislation, and that becomes key in understanding what is happening both within his own party, but also the power that he has here domestically. The tide seems to have turned, and so in that vein, is that something that Ramaphosa can also play on?
Absolutely. I always contend with my students and anyone that cares to listen. South Africa and America are very similar societies in their race relations, in their history, and in their futures. These are not countries that can, I won't lie, I just want people at home to disabuse themselves from this notion that we can replace America in relations. That's not possible, because the relations between the two people are quite advanced, and these people like each other. However, South Africa is also similar to the United States, that you can't get a lot done without compromising. And no country in the world knows the power of compromising like South Africa, forgiving people, deciding to move on, and having an economic outlook instead of a political or justice lens. These are strengths, and that is why I'm quite confident that this is a president who's up to the task based on his experience as a negotiator in South Africa. And in America, in Congress, basically, you are having these people who have different constituents. These constituents have different interests, and they're basically voicing their constituents' feelings and interests. And this is itself, some might argue, is democracy.
But how much can we compromise? I mean, there's a lot of concern back home. Like, hey, President Ramaphosa, don't go and sell South Africa all in the interests of, trying to impress Donald Trump. How much and what exactly could we compromise at this stage?
A lot. Well, that's how countries promulgate foreign policy, Mangob. Countries must compromise. And a country like South Africa, if you look at it, South Africa is not even as far as... It has lots of trade relations with the United States, right? After China, it's the United States. So compromise is the name of the game. The nature of the compromise, it might be compromised in new terrain, like compromising in resource extraction within South Africa, being able to have more American students come to South Africa for various programs, etc., etc. But South Africa must not be afraid of compromising. And my point is, if you look at how much compromising some of these erstwhile NATO allies of America have done, South Africa must look forward towards compromise. And this is not selling out. Once you are mentioning selling out, you are being caught in this Cold War, bipolar world, ideological type of... That's yesterday. In these years of AI, Mangobo, there is no such thing as ideology around these matters. Each frog must jump for itself. And this is South Africa's turn to jump for itself when it comes to being a big boy and a big girl and doing what big boys and big girls do. They compromise, they get the deal done for their people.
Cometh the man, cometh the hour. That's what we'll be talking about over the coming days. About President Cyril Ramaphosa, you've heard Phiwokuhle Mnyandu there. He's the Assistant Director at the Center for Africa Studies at Howard University, talking lots there, Xoli, about how we go into this moment. Clearly, he believes we've got a lot to leverage. In fact, South Africa is in good stead to come out with good deals. But just how much of this will be discussed behind the scenes? And will President Trump then, on camera, though, want to show that he is in charge and embarrass our president? It's anyone's guess, but the clock is ticking. Wednesday is when Ramaphosa will be in that Oval Office, and will bring you all of those updates right here in Washington, D.C.